My people have been a slave race for over 10,000 years. Once long ago, the Subari were a prosperous people with a rich culture and a complex society. We were just beginning to explore our own solar system when the Martians discovered our planet. They were the first aliens we ever encountered, and they were also the first to enslave us. They imposed production quotas and installed overseers to ensure their demands were met. Everything we had was diverted to fulfilling their needs, and any part of our society that didn't serve them was left to wither and die. Music, theater, and art became practices only engaged in during brief respites from the relentless grind of the factories and mines. The Martians ruled us for 2,717 years, a period during which we clung to the hope of vengeance, though we knew it was merely a tradition handed down through generations who had known no freedom. All rebellions had long since been crushed brutally. We served the Martians, and we always would, until the Akpids came. The Akpids defeated the Martians, burning their fleets and slaughtering their armies. They drove them off world after world, giving us a fleeting glimmer of hope. But soon we realized we had only exchanged one set of masters for another, more demanding and less complacent than the Martians had become. What few freedoms we had left were squeezed ever tighter. The Akpids didn't last long, only about 500 years. They squeezed their slave races too hard until there was nothing left to give, and their empire collapsed as other powers took advantage of their weakness. After the Akpids came the Venin, then the Kogi, the Novian, the Lights, the Jor, and the Demorian. Then, a little over 3,000 years ago, the Kolau took control of our planet. A slug-like race, their bodies had atrophied from eons of reliance on their slaves. They could do almost nothing without us, and were all the more dangerous for it. Every Kolau was a prodigy in cruelty and domination. The Kolau had little compassion for others, even their own kind. They weren't a society so much as a collection of individuals whose interests occasionally aligned. Each one was virtually a king, with vast territories under their control, whole fleets of ships and armies of slaves. Some of our former masters had treated us as state property, others as private property, but none had given such complete power to a single individual. Each Kolau had the absolute right of life and death over tens of thousands of Subari and many other slave races, a power they used frequently. We meant nothing to them. One dead slave was a barely noticeable loss. We tried our best to keep our culture and traditions alive. Our masters worked us every waking hour, but we scraped together every spare minute to educate our children in our sciences, arts, and history. We saved what we could and passed on what we had, clinging to the idea that something of the Subari that once was could rise again. The Kolau made this very difficult. They didn't care enough to deliberately suppress our culture, but slaves of one master had almost no contact with slaves of another Kolau. There were only 2 instances where we might pass on information more widely: when a Kolau cooperated with another on a project, or when one killed another and took their slaves. Neither happened frequently. There was never a single rebellion against the Kolau. Every Subari knew that any sign of defiance would result in a horrific, agonizing death. We awaited the day when the Kolau would suffer the same fate as our former masters, but we didn't believe that would give us a chance to reclaim our freedom. We hoped only for kinder masters. However, centuries passed, then millennia. There came a generation who realized the Kolau had been our masters longer than any other race. More generations followed, seeing no flicker in the Kolau's power. Their ruthlessness and intelligence were unmatched, and almost every enemy they faced was destroyed. Then rumors started to spread. Some Kolau had suffered a heavy defeat on the edge of the Orion Cygnus arm of the galaxy. The slaves they left were redistributed among whichever Kolau could enforce their claim, integrating them into other slave populations. This handful of survivors brought tales of a fearsome new enemy who outmaneuvered and outfought the Kolau at every turn. Apparently, a few Kolau had encountered an isolated species with no subject planets or slave armies, and no concept of how brutal the wider galaxy was. This naive species had greeted the Kolau with offers of peaceful relations, having no idea the danger they were in. The Kolau attacked almost without thinking, never considering that the target species might resist effectively. They underestimated the humans, a species willing to throw themselves towards the guns of the enemy without a master behind them holding a proverbial whip. The humans' disciplined and highly motivated military forces were more than a match for the endless ranks of Kalau slave soldiers. One by one, the 8 Kalau who launched the attack had their armies broken and routed, and one by one they were hunted down. We did not rejoice. The Subari were not classified as a military race, our physiology and temperament not considered useful for such purposes. We weren't directly in the line of fire, but we knew that if the Kalau faced a major threat, they would press us harder, wringing every last drop of productivity from us. We hoped the fighting would end with the defeat of the Kalau who had initially attacked the humans. The Kalau would not mourn their fallen kin. Their deaths meant more slaves and resources for the survivors, but the humans issued a general demand for all Kalau to relinquish their slaves and evacuate all conquered planets. War ensued, as the Kalau realized what had been a minor irritation on the fringes of their realm was a genuine threat. Battle fleets clashed across an entire arm of the galaxy. Thousands of ships left smoldering wrecks drifting in the void. We expected the humans to be overrun by sheer numbers, but their forces held their own against fleets and armies many times their size. We only heard rumors on Subar, stories from a handful of slaves relocated as the front lines moved. It seemed like Kalau were dying in large numbers, not just their slaves but the Kalau themselves. Entire planets were lost, all the masters killed as humans overran their former domains. Most slaves were lost too, unable to be removed in time. It never occurred to us that the Kalau might lose. We only thought about how much we would suffer before our masters triumphed. The Kalau issued proclamations of their glorious victories, celebrating their domination. Yet more slaves turned up on Subar, along with masters desperate for protection. Military races charged with keeping us in line seemed less confident. Rumors spread that humans had crushed every attack and were advancing rapidly, killing every Kalau who resisted. We began to accept the impossible. The Kalau were losing, the humans kept coming, and even united, the Kalau couldn't stop them. Finally, we feared a race more terrible than the Kalau. What if they had no use for us? What if they simply exterminated us? The front lines crept closer until the war was on our doorstep. There had been about 10,000 Kalau on Subar before the war, ruling over 9 billion people, mostly Subari. By the time the human fleet reached us, the Kalau population had swelled to 20,000, with almost 200 million slave soldiers ready to defend the planet. We didn't expect the humans to win, and if they did, we didn't expect to survive. We gathered, saying our goodbyes, promising to carry on the memory of the Subari if anyone survived. Then we waited, with fear but with the serenity of knowing there was no slavery in death. We listened to reports of the battle with bated breath as the human fleet approached. They engaged the vanguard but were also already on the ground. Weapons fire could be seen from ships in low orbit, while power-armored suits cut down slave soldiers by the hundred. The humans punched through at key points, hammering the greatest concentrations of Kalau on the planet. Command centers were stormed, and the Kalau sheltering inside were massacred. As the masters fell, the defending forces were thrown into disarray. Without a clear chain of command, many units surrendered. The holes in the defensive line became gaping chasms, accelerating the disintegration of the slave armies. Even slave soldiers whose masters were still alive surrendered, knowing the Kalau wouldn't be for long. I watched as the weapon fire in the night sky slowed, then stopped. The battle had ended. The humans had won. The demand for surrender was broadcast across the planet. We surrendered gladly, relieved we were not to be exterminated. The news spread quickly, and we agreed to greet the conquering forces with a gesture to prove our worth as slaves. The humans provided coordinates for their occupation forces landing. Our delegations met them with tentacles raised in submission, bearing the slave collars the Kalau made us wear. But the humans did something we did not expect. They welcomed our delegations but refused the collars. "We did not come to replace your masters," they said. "We came to end them, and end slavery with them. My people have been a slave race for over 10,000 years. Today, because of the humans, we are free."